On this occasion we will discuss the history of ancient Celts. The ancient Celts were various tribal groups living in parts of Western and Central Europe in the Late Bronze Age and through the Iron Age, c. 700 BCE to c. 400 CE. Given the name Celts by ancient writers, these tribes and their culture migrated, and so they established a presence in territories from Portugal to Turkey. Although diverse tribes and never a single unified state, the ancient Celts were connected by the Celtic language and marked similarities in art, modes of warfare, religion, and burial practices. Although the Celtic culture was absorbed within the Roman Empire from the 1st century BCE, Celtic people continued to thrive in more remote parts of Europe like Ireland and northern Britain, where Celtic languages are still spoken today. The term, Celts, is commonly used to refer to peoples who lived in Iron Age Europe north of the Mediterranean region prior to the Roman conquest, after ancient writers gave them that name. However, it is a problematic label. This is because these peoples were not part of a unified state but, rather, belonged to a multitude of tribes, many of which had no direct contact with each other. The term remains useful for its convenience, but it does disguise the complex relations between different Western and Central European tribes, the overlapping of some cultural features in time and space, and the isolation and uniqueness of other such features. The European Iron Age was certainly a vibrant period of cultural interaction, trade relations, warfare, and migrations. Most scholars agree that the origins of Celtic culture can be traced back to 3 earlier, closely related, and overlapping cultural groups. The first of these is the Late Bronze Age Urnfield culture present around the Upper Danube from c. 1300 BCE. The name of this culture derives from the common practice of interring the cremated remains of the deceased in urns and burying them. These peoples remain obscure for lack of archaeological evidence. From the beginning of the 1st millennium BCE and over the next 2 or 3 centuries, ironworking technology spread across Europe. As a consequence, iron replaced bronze as the metal of choice to make stronger and more durable tools and weapons. The second Proto-Celtic group was the Hallstatt culture, named after the site of that name in Upper Austria, which existed from circa 1200 to c. 450 BCE but was at its peak in the 8th to 6th century BCE. The Hallstatt culture spread to cover what is today Western Austria, southern Germany, Switzerland, and eastern France on the one side, and eastern Austria, Bohemia, and parts of the Balkans on the other. It was the western side of this area that would eventually develop into what we might today call the ancient Celts. The Hallstatt culture likely spread via various means such as trade, tribal alliances, intermarriages, imitation, and migration. These peoples prospered thanks to local deposits of salt, iron, and copper, commodities which could be traded along waterways. That trade reached as far south as the Mediterranean cultures, the Etruscans in Italy and the Greek colonies in southern France, is evidenced by the presence of imported goods in Hallstatt burial mounds and precious goods such as gold and amber jewelry. The Hallstatt culture went into decline in the 5th century BCE, likely due to local resources running out, increased tribal competition, and the shift of trade routes elsewhere. The third group significant in the formation of Celtic culture proper is the Latène culture, circa 450 c. 50 BCE, named after the site of that name on the northern shores of Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland. Perhaps best identified as a group of diverse tribes unified by common features in art and religion, the Latène culture was eventually present in a wide arc covering Western and Central Europe, spanning from Ireland to Romania. Cultural features include ironworking, making votive offerings in water sources, depositing weapons in tombs, and art which is stylized with swirling, geometrical, and vegetal designs. Once again, there is a multitude of evidence for trade with the Mediterranean states. Latène centers were particularly successful around major river points such as the Loire, Marne, Moselle, and Elbe. The Latène culture does not exactly correspond to the Celtic peoples since it existed in non-Celtic areas, for example in Germanic-speaking Denmark. Nevertheless, the term Latène, one originally coined by archaeologists to classify artifacts, is still commonly, if imprecisely, used as a synonym for Celtic culture in Europe during the second half of the 1st millennium BCE. The first real sign of trouble in the Celtic world was a marked increase in local competition for resources and trade opportunities, and this manifested itself in the building of oppida in the 2nd and 1st century BCE. An oppidum was the Roman name for larger settlements which we now apply specifically to fortified sites, usually located on high points in the landscape or on plains at naturally defensible points like river bends. The fortifications usually consisted of an earthwork circuit wall, sometimes with outer ditches. Oppida were used as a point of refuge in war and otherwise as a safe place to concentrate manufacturing workshops and store the community's resources. This hostile environment deteriorated further when the Romans became intent on revenge for the havoc caused by the migrating Celtic tribes in the 2 previous centuries and, lured by the promise of gold and other resources, total conquest. In 125 BCE the Romans attacked the Arverni tribe in Gaul and, less than a century later, Julius Caesar attacked and conquered Gaul, despite stiff resistance from such tribal leaders as Vercingetorix, 82–46 BCE. The Roman Empire kept on expanding. Direct attacks were made on such important community figures as the Druids, and so the continental Celts and those in southern Britain were eventually assimilated into Roman culture. The Celts did continue to thrive in more isolated places like Ireland and northern Britain. It is from these areas that Celtic culture would continue into the medieval period and express itself most visibly in the epic poems of Irish, Welsh, and Scottish medieval literature and in art, now Christianized. The old Celtic traditions lived on in these epic poems and in the form of complex curvilinear designs within illuminated manuscripts, in the ubiquitous penannular brooches, and in the sophisticated vegetal motifs on imposing stone crosses in churchyards. Thank you for following our videos. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe so you can always follow video updates from us.